Hey, thank you for finding our podcast, The Third Option. Some of you are hearing on audio, some of you are actually watching our faces on video. I'm Rick.
I'm Judy, and we
And
are the third
we
option.
are talking about the third option. And today our episode is called Shame and the Scapegoat.
It's a very interesting take, I think.
I am excited to talk about it because I'm very familiar with dealing with shame, which is essentially an indictment upon yourself as a person.
Mhm.
Um, it's the common issue that all mankind deals with and all have ever since Adam in the Garden of Eden. And we see Adam and Eve dealing with that from the very beginning when they partake of the knowledge of good and evil. And the first things we see are the fear and the shame.
Mhm.
And then when you're carrying shame, you have to deal with it. And shame is a horrible thing. So you have to find some way of trying to deal with it.
Mhm. Well, let's start by just defining the word shame. So, shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are inherently flawed and therefore not worthy of love, not worthy of belonging. And so that is the common human experience that we all have at one point or another have had an experience
And the
of.
sad thing is that it's a very painful experience.
Yes.
And because it's so painful, we have tried to come up with ways of dealing with it. And many have not worked.
Hmm.
The good news is that we do know one that does work, and we'll talk about that in this and actually the next episode after this. We're going to be talking about
Yeah.
this quite a bit.
I think shame is one of the most painful feelings that a human being can experience.
Hmm. Because it gets down to the core of who you are.
Hmm.
There's guilt and there's shame,
Hmm.
and guilt, you can be guilty of doing something bad or harmful or whatever. I can be guilty of that.
Hmm.
But I can, I can express that I'm sorry. I don't want to do that. I can tell the person that may be offended by it that I'm sorry, and I don't want, don't want to do that. I can tell God that I really don't want to do that again.
Hmm.
And that's something with your activity, but it doesn't necessarily have to reflect upon who you are as a being.
Hmm.
Shame goes down to that. Shame says I'm unlovable.
And I think that's what compels people into self destructive behavior patterns.
Hmm.
Because even if subconsciously they don't realize it, they believe that they're not worthy. And so they will be almost compelled into behaviors that are disrespectful of their own lives, just uh, feeling that they want to get this feeling of inadequacy off of them, and
Yeah.
that would help. That would have people turning to drugs to kind of alter their state,
Hmm.
or even food, or shopping, or work, all
Hmm.
kinds of things to avoid this kind of
Hmm.
uncomfortable and painful
Yeah.
feeling.
Or perfectionism, or uh, one of the ways that was big in my life that I would my way of dealing with it, I had very self-destructive behavior. There again, I'm not worthy of being loved, and I'm inherently flawed, and I really, really did carry that belief and that sense of inadequacy. But in that, it can either be what's recognized as destructive behavior. People pleasing was another thing that what was involved in that. But also there's other unhealthy behaviors, and some of them you say, you say it can be a shopping addiction, or food or different things, which are not bad in themselves in any way.
Hmm.
But we can carry them to an extreme because we're driven to try to do something with our perfectionism is a great example.
Yeah, it's the motive behind the
Hmm.
action. So let's say shopping per se, that's not a bad activity. But if your motive is to shop to get out of feeling uncomfortable,
Hmm.
then that's the motive that is driving you to do something in your flesh. That if you want true healing, it can only come through a spiritual, uh, Jesus driven uh,
Yeah.
solution.
And I'm excited about getting into that in these next couple of of episodes. The perfection thing is something that we see a lot, and that's there again. That's trying to make ourselves be good enough because that belief is that we're inherently flawed. Now, I was self-destructive before I became a Christian, but after that, I thought that Christianity was my vehicle for becoming good. So then I had sort of a Christian perfectionism, and
It's very common in a religious spirit. It's very common.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so I'm using that to try to be good and godly, and it. But without that healing love, you get spiritually proud of things like how often you pray, how much you pray, how
I
many good
know.
deeds you do.
I know so much more than you do in the
You've studied.
Bible,
Hmm.
and you kind of get on a little bit of a
Yeah.
higher level.
And you judge others unrighteously because you can always see that they're the ones you need. People, you heard people talk like this. People need to pray more. They need to read their Bibles more. You need to do more. You need to give more. There's that. And so it's interesting that I carried a spiritual pride because I was accomplished as a Christian. I was doing a lot of good things, but it never satisfied because I always still carried that sense of shame that I'm not quite good enough.
It reminds me of Paul.
Yes.
When Paul talked about how he was the Pharisee among Pharisees, but he still would try to do things that he ended up he couldn't do, or he would try to stop things that he couldn't stop.
Hmm.
And he said, what is the solution here?
Yeah.
And he said, thank goodness for Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
That was his
And in
solution.
him there's no condemnation. And it was after he received that, then he could share these things and says, you know what, I was a Pharisee of the Pharisees, but the things that I didn't want to do, I was still doing them.
Hmm.
And see, that's another part of this shame is that it the shame continues to grow because shame makes us feel like we need to hold secrets, that we need to keep silent about things because we don't feel safe.
Right.
Because if we reveal too much of ourselves, it will just show the inadequacy and the insufficiency that we carry, and then it'll bring judgment. And sad to say that in too much of uh, religious circles, um, there is a judgment that can come on people, and people are afraid of that. There are certain things. For instance, what I noticed was that as a pastor, it was really hard. It was some men. I found out that men carried many men would carry a sexual addiction. That they would talk about all these other kinds of things, but they didn't want to bring that because every one of them that ever talked to me about it said, I was afraid to say something because I thought that you would look down on me. I thought that you would think less of me. And so people carry that. What is it? That's shame.
Mm-hmm.
That's just shame. There
And
are
I've got to
people.
keep it a secret so that no one finds out how inadequate, how unworthy I am of
There are
connection and
people that feel
belonging.
like they have to hide, even in church, have to hide their own sexuality or these things that go on inside of us.
Hmm.
Um, uh, there's those things that if people knew,
Hmm.
I can't even tell my friends in church about this because if they knew,
They would discard me.
yes, they would
Hmm.
think of me as less than they
Hmm.
think right now. They think I'm pretty good. They think I'm okay.
Hmm.
But if they really knew me, see, if they really knew me, then see, that's that shame
Hmm.
talking.
Hmm.
And so there's an antidote for that.
Hmm.
But and we'll get into that now as we look at. We want to see um, where shame is often dealt with. It can be dealt with two ways. One is it can be dealt with through what Jesus offers, and
Hmm.
that's healing. And we'll talk a lot about that in the next couple of episodes. But then the other way is that we just do the human things of trying to make ourselves look better.
It's like a coping
It's a coping mechanism,
mechanism.
and so we'll scapegoat and we'll put our blame and our guilt and shame on somebody else. Well, at least I'm better than you. And so we have all these I'm better than you or you're less than me and all those things go on.
Almost like levels are being
Yeah, yeah,
introduced.
and we accuse because of that. And remember, the Greek word for accuser in the Bible is categorio. We categorize people.
Yeah.
You're one of those.
Yeah.
You're one of those people. And see, and And when you put someone into a category, it seems like it's invariably to shame that person. Oh, if you believe in a certain theology, oh, you're one of those, And so there's so much shame that keeps being passed around, and we see this happening in
When you look in the Old Covenant, there is a example in Leviticus 16, and this is really God is giving the ordinances for Yom Kippur, right?
the Day
When
of Atonement.
the Day of Atonement for the whole Jewish nation. This is when they bring the goats rather than the individual sheep.
This is not the day. This is not Passover where they bring the lamb for the sins of the household.
Mm-hmm.
This is for the nation of Israel, and so in Leviticus 16 verses 7 through 10, he tells Aaron to take two goats,
Mm-hmm.
and to cast lots between those two goats, and one of them would fall on to be the goat for the Lord, and the other would be the scapegoat. And the one for the Lord that's the one that would be killed. His blood would be shed, and that blood would be used to sanctify the things in the tabernacle and so on. And that would be the blood that was shed, the sacrifice for the sins of the people. That's a type of Jesus. The other one is called the scapegoat. And on the scapegoat, they don't slaughter it, they don't shed its blood, they don't kill it in that way. They symbolically transfer their sins. They put their hands on the head of the goat and they transfer symbolically their sins to that goat. That's, it's like, take it off of me and put it on you. And then send the goat off into the wilderness. Now get out of here. Get away from me. Just
Mm-hmm.
get this sin away from me. This
Mm-hmm.
sin, this shame, this guilt.
Mm-hmm.
And so it symbolizes two ways of dealing with sin. One of them works.
Mm-hmm.
The atonement of Jesus, which the one goat happens to be a type of that in this particular picture. The one for Jesus works because he heals the brokenhearted.
Mm-hmm.
He purges the conscience. There's no condemnation in him. That takes care of the shame part of it. The other way doesn't really work, but
Mm-hmm.
it shows a way that people try to do it, and they scapegoat. And mankind has had this common issue of sin ever since Adam and Eve.
Mm-hmm.
When we first see them afraid because of their own nakedness. So we see the shame there.
Mm-hmm.
And so we see, think about this couple, these people here. Look at Adam dealing with this intense feeling of unworthiness.
And that's what it says when they opened their eyes after they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They opened their eyes and they were filled with shame.
Yeah.
At what they were experiencing was that intensely painful feeling. And when God came to them and said, where are you?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I was
afraid.
So
we hid ourselves.
And I was naked. And then God was like, you must have eaten of that tree. And it really put it on Adam directly. Did you eat of that tree? And Adam is so filled with this awful feeling of shame that he cannot bear it.
He's got to get rid of it. Can he put it on somebody else?
And he turns to his
wife,
partner, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, just moments before. And now get this feeling off of me and put it on her.
She's the problem.
Yeah.
She's to blame. Don't look at my nakedness and my shit. Look at her.
And you're
at
kind
least
of to
I'm better
blame
than her.
too, God, because you gave her to me.
Yeah, so you're
so
a
there's
problem
a little
too,
bit of
but it's not me. And see, and that's people will do that because it hurts.
Yes.
And it
Want
can't be me.
Off of me.
Yeah,
Yes.
how do I get this off of me? Paul talked about that, saying, "Oh, wretched man that I am." Who's going to deliver me
from this body of death?
Yeah. And then we love to point out that the next verse is, I thank God through Jesus Christ my Lord, there is therefore now no condemnation in him. And I want to bring back again that sense of pain and shame that's there, because here comes God. God is love, and they felt so ashamed about their own condition that, first of all, they try to cover themselves. And so that's a picture too of what we try to do. We cover ourselves with trying to look better. Perfectionism can come in, or self-destruction, where we just bow out and just like, don't look at me. That's what we're trying to say in this,
Mhm.
in one sense. And then they hide, pulling themselves away from God. And
Mhm.
there's that feeling of unworthiness and being inherently flawed. And sad to say, a lot of our religion plays into that, because there's a lot of people that fundamentally believe that we are created inherently flawed, that we are, um, this whole idea that we are these despicable and depraved sinners from creation. When my Bible says that He created all things, including man, and He said it's good,
Mhm.
and He rested because it was good. And the Bible also says He, before He formed me in the womb, He knew me.
Mm.
We were all created. We were born precious, lovable beings. Um, but we follow into this shame, and we don't know who we are. We feel like we're flawed, and we're trying to be better, and we try to show ourselves to be better. And so we'll often scapegoat humans. And so this is where it's like, well, at least I'm better than you. So I can remember, before I'd come to the Lord, a some people came knocking on the door and were talking to me and a couple of other friends, trying to lead us to the Lord. And they asked the question. They said, like, I think the question was, do you know where you would go? Would you make it to heaven if you died? And my answer was, I didn't feel like I would. I felt like I was a pretty bad guy, but I said, maybe I've got a chance because I'm not as bad as some people. you know, my mind went.
Mhm.
I could think of people that were at least worse than I was, and I thought, well, I might have a chance because I'm not like those guys. And so what we do. So what was I doing right then? I'm scapegoating. I'm like, they're worse than me. I'm better than them, and
Mhm.
so somehow I take the higher moral ground.
Mhm.
And I do that to try to make myself feel better
Mhm.
about my condition, about who I am. And people will do that. And that's why there's always this push, and there's these things going, because people are struggling with shame, and they want to be good and they want to look good. And so they have enemies because we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. And we're doing all of that. And it goes all the way back to that root of shame that humans are dealing with.
Can we go back to the Leviticus passage for a minute? Because why was God establishing two two options? I mean, was it a picture? Was it
That's
to
all it was.
create a picture?
Mhm.
Because also the scapegoat that had all the sins of the whole nation of Israel on it was sent out into the wilderness really to die. In fact, I think some of the research that we did said that someone would make sure that
Yeah.
the goat would
Went off a
go
cliff.
into the wilderness and go off a cliff, even to make sure that that scapegoat was no more,
Hmm.
was diminished,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's a picture, and one picture is of Christ, like a precursor of Christ, and the other picture is a man, um, impetus, like a flesh way of mankind dealing with this awful feeling of shame that they cannot handle on
If we
themselves.
don't get to the core of the shame and the healing of the shame,
Hmm.
then we deal with it another
Another
way,
way.
and it doesn't work.
Hmm.
And it just causes trouble, and it causes fighting, and it causes enemies, and it causes unrighteous judgment.
Hmm.
There's a quote from the movie Wicked that we saw recently from,
Hmm.
and the wizard had this quote, and he said, let's see,
Like the
we've got it
one.
written down.
No, I don't think I wrote it down.
He
Did we?
says that the best way to bring people
Oh,
together is to have a common enemy.
yeah.
And so if we look around, we notice that happens, that people will group up and rally around common enemies.
Hmm.
If you even look at our politics today, the liberal people that are on the liberal side, they're very convinced that they're on the moral high ground here. We are better people, and those
Hmm.
are scumbags on the other side. You go to the other side, and those that are on the more conservative side, they're like, they really believe we are the good people, those are the bad guys or the evil
Hmm.
ones, and they both believe that.
Mhm.
And what is it? See, that goes all the way back to that shame. That's taking the moral high ground, and let's
Mm.
all fight against this this uh, this enemy. And what do? They call each other stupid. They call each other idiots. They call each other evil. They call all these things that are going on. And what's that doing? It's always jockeying for the moral high ground, and it can be traced back to the shame.
What about even in World War One or World War Two, that the German nation, they held the Jewish people responsible for the
That
loss
was a scapegoat.
of World War
For their
One.
decline after World War One,
One.
and Germany was just in horrible shape,
Mm-hmm.
and everything about it was horrible. The morale, the economy, there was no food. They and they blamed the Jews. There's always a scapegoat, and people rallied around that,
Mm-hmm.
thinking that if we can kill all the Jews, get rid of the Jews, then everything would be well. It wasn't for
Yeah,
them. Remember the Puritans and the Salem witch
that's right.
trials.
Yeah.
There again, they rally around an enemy. These are the bad people, and we're the good
And if
ones.
we can just purge ourselves of these bad
Hmm.
ones, everything will be okay.
Yeah.
But it's like it's a false thing. If you look at Cain and Abel, Cain thought that by getting rid of Abel, he would feel better.
Hmm.
But it didn't solve anything. There is only one cure.
Hmm.
So the cure for this horrible feeling of like being unlovable and being rejected and not belonging, the cure is the opposite of that,
Yeah.
where you know that you belong,
Yeah.
that you know that you are loved unconditionally, that you know that you are worthwhile and valued and treasured. These sort of things, it actually sucks the poison out of the shame. It pours in the balm of love and it actually heals it. It doesn't cover it over
Hmm.
or put you on a temporary higher ground. It just heals
Yeah.
it. And that word for salvation, soteria, it means
Wholeness.
wholeness. So we're wanting healing so that we can be our whole
And
selves.
that's why Paul said that he said he's not ashamed of the good news, because it is the power of God that brings wholeness to people.
Mm.
And that's what we're talking about. So there's a Jesus way,
Mm-hmm.
the good news that reveals the heart of a loving father that says, you are lovable.
Mm-hmm.
You are capable of being loved,
Mm.
and you're precious, and you're beautiful. And that's the answer right there to the whole thing.
When you become persuaded, when you become convinced, when you become, I know that God completely accepts me, I feel like you can walk into a room and people are impacted by that sense of being included, being wanted. It's not something that you have to put on or sell. It's just in you. It's just a part of you.
Healed hearts spread the healing
Healing.
balm. We spread the love, the compassion. And because we don't have enemies anymore, we're not going to walk into a room and make anybody feel less than. We don't need
Mm-hmm.
to anymore,
Mm-hmm.
because we have found our sufficiency
Mm-hmm.
in God. Once the shame is dealt with, we don't have to be better than anybody
Mm-hmm.
anymore. I Before we close, I want to bring up my own um, experience with this, because they say in sociology and psychology, many people will teach that there's that in a family that you play these different roles. That's
There's a
a
system.
system in the
Mm-hmm.
family, and like somebody will be the hero in the family, somebody will be the mascot, that's the entertainer, and somebody will be the scapegoat, somebody will be the enabler, and somebody will be the lost child, the sort of invisible one. And so in my house, I had one sibling, and I would say she would be considered the hero, because she was very good and conscientious, and she was she easily obeyed what mom and dad wanted. Not that she didn't get in trouble sometimes, we all did, but she fit more that role. She was the kind that would do the laundry and fold the clothes and put them up without having to be asked to do it. And so she would, get these, just like, oh, thank you, that was really good of you to do that. And I'd be like, what do you want, a trophy or a medal, and I would just, it would burn me up because it made me feel less than.
Mhm.
And I just wasn't that way. I was more mischievous. I was in trouble a lot.
You
I
were
wasn't.
left-handed.
I was left-handed. I
Not that
wasn't.
there's anything wrong with being left-handed,
No,
but
I'm
you just
very happy about
thought
that.
you thought
I thought
differently.
differently, and I wasn't really good with their rules, and so I got in
Wow.
trouble. And so a lot of it I can say I brought on me, but nevertheless, I received a lot of words and a lot of condemnation about, and it felt like it was about who I was.
Mhm.
And so I played the role of the scapegoat. I had another sibling, a younger brother he was the mascot. He was funny and he was cute, and I was the troublemaker essentially.
Mhm.
And I really was. But I took on, because I was that way, the words that came my way and the treatment that came my way, and really some abuse that came my way because of that, um, made me feel terribly inferior as a human.
I remember you telling me one time that your dad had said, "Rick,
You can be an asset
asset
to the
to
family
them."
instead of a detriment.
And
So
so
I was the detriment to the family.
here's
So
this child with the whole family like, "You're a detriment to
yeah.
our system of existing."
And
And it's go ahead.
what happened, what's going on, see, everybody's got their dysfunctions,
Mhm.
and families have dysfunctions, but if they can put it on one person, then they can all agree that they're actually okay.
Mhm.
And so it was easy to put it all on me, and I led a life that whatever group I got in for a while, I ended up being the scapegoat, and I would go from one to the other. And then
Actually, you would leave the house. You
I
would
did leave the
actually
house
do what a scapegoat does, which is to go off alone in the wilderness
one
because you're
day.
not accepted, you're not wanted, you
Mhm.
don't seem like you're contributing to the family. So you just didn't tell
No,
anybody.
one
You
day I
just
got up
left,
early and just left and
started.
hit the road and started hitchhiking across the
Awesome.
country.
Yeah.
And I lived very self-destructive for a few years. And then I met Jesus, or he found me or something, but I'm so glad it did. And he became the antidote.
Mm,
And we'll get into more of that in our next episode about how Jesus overthrows the scapegoat system.
mhm.
It's an exciting
Yeah.
topic.
So stay tuned to next week to hear a little bit more on this subject. I imagine that many of you can relate to the scapegoat system, either being the scapegoat or actually
Scapegoating
scapegoating
others.
others.
I've done both.
We've done both. And yeah, we would love for you to tune in next week where we talk more about how Jesus addressed this whole system.
How he overthrows it, because he does. He
Hmm.
really is the answer. Thank God for the good news, the gospel, and we're so glad that you tuned in. Please send us any comments or questions. We feed off of those, and it gives us input so that we know more about what to talk about and what needs to be explained more, um, as we minister. So we thank you again, and we hope you have a great day.
Bye bye.